Hello, everyone. Welcome back to A New Crusade. Good afternoon or good morning, whatever it is for you. I'm here today speaking with Father Calvin Robinson. Would you like to introduce yourself to everyone? Although I'm sure from
Hi, I am a parish priest in Grand Rapids, West Michigan, formerly of England, and I used to have a TV show called Calvin's Common Sense Crusade. These days, I use my public ministry do my public ministry on social media, mostly on X, which is at Calvin Robinson.
There we go. I think that most people probably became familiar with you during the Oxford Union debate. I think that's when I became familiar with you. And then you've done a lot of really, really big shows. I guess if you're from the UK, maybe they would have known you from before that. But for us Americans, I think that's probably when a lot of us heard from you. I was really impressed in that debate. And I think you really started with a good first impression on everyone with that debate, you know?
That's very cool.
Yes. Yeah. And so I think that and so now obviously if I'm not wrong, the debate was on women's ordination, right?
Same-sex marriage in the church.
Same-sex marriage. Okay.
Yeah.
But I guess within the kind of debate sphere, the same type of people who would be debating that would have been moving for women's ordination. And now there was obviously the ordination of the new, I don't even know if it's technically, I feel like I'm committing a sin by saying the Bishop of Canterbury, you know? What's your kind of general feelings about that?
So the Archbishop of Canterbury, Dame Sarah Mullally, she's not yet been installed, but she will be very shortly. It's obviously a shame for anyone within the Church of England, because there has been, for the longest time, the understanding that not everyone believes in the ordination of women, because there are still some people with Catholic theology in the Church of England. But now that they're primus inter pares, their first among equals is going to be a woman. It's going to be hard to have that kind of plurality of truth that they've been having for so long. They call it the mutual flourishing. So you've got the liberals, or those that affirm women, and traditionalists, those with Catholic theology. And I think the feminists have been trying to push the trads out for a long time, but it looks like they've got their way now, unfortunately.
Yeah, it is unfortunate. It seems to me there almost seems to be something in kind of a sick way. It almost seems kind of poetic that in the moment that the head of the Church of England, the king, has become so obviously scandalous, that this is also the time when they've gone ahead and put this female into this position. Do you see like a kind of the same trend maybe moving both of these forces?
Yeah, so the king isn't the head of the Church of England. The king doesn't have any say in the Church of England at all. He's a supreme governor, so he's got a ceremonial role. But there is no head of the Church of England, which is part of the problem. There's no authority. The Archbishop of Canterbury is seen as the figurehead, being the first among equals, but that's not really a leadership role. And so that's part of the problem. But yes, they're related. The state obviously has a big hand to play in the state church. It should have been the other way around, as in the church should be a good influence on the state and provide a moral compass. And this is why there are bishops in the Houses of Parliament, the Lord's spiritual, to provide that Christian morality to the legislature, essentially. But it's gone the other way around. And so the state says things like, you will implement women's orders, or we will change canon law for you. And that's what the threat was. And so canon law in the Church of England is canon law of the land. So it's Parliament as well as the Synod. So they were pushed towards women's orders, and it seems they're being pushed at the moment towards same-sex marriage. And the church has tried to do it itself, and it's failed, thankfully. So there is no same-sex marriage within the church. Obviously, there can't be, but the politicians are still pushing for it on an egalitarian principle, this secular liberal idea that everything and all things are equal, which of course we know not to be true. But from their perspective, they're trying to make the church nicer, and it's not the state's job to do that.
Mm-hmm. I had spoken with someone who is from England, and we were kind of talking about the differences between the British right and generally and the American right. And one of the biggest differences he had pointed out, and I think for an American, I would like to think myself pretty well informed on British politics. I find the parliamentary system to be more entertaining from like an outside perspective, like the game of politics to be more entertaining. But he had pointed out that there really isn't a Christian right in the way that there is in the United States. And so that's kind of what he had said. And I kind of just took his word for that. But I think obviously the interesting thing is that a large part of the Christian right in America is specifically kind of low church evangelical. I'm curious, how do you see the difference between the right-wing politics in the UK and in America, and what is kind of the general interaction that Christianity has, and kind of maybe the dichotomy you see there?
Yeah, that's good. So one similarity is that there is a right-wing Catholic cohort, but like in America, in Britain, they are a minority, unfortunately. It is interesting that the right in America is mostly evangelical, low church, non-denominational, whatever, Protestant. But at least they have the faith. Whereas in England, the right is very libertarian, very neocon, very economically conservative, not very socially conservative. The faith has been done away with for the most part. And I'm speaking, obviously, these are massive generalizations. There are conservative Christians in Britain. I'm a member of the UKIP party, which is the only party headed up by a Christian. Most of the mainstream parties don't have anything to do with the faith anymore because they think it's embarrassing, and or they want to be inclusive of people of all faiths and all that kind of fluff. It's all leftism. But even the right of British politics is mostly leftism. There is a growing ethno-nat contingent, but for them, quite often having an ethnically English country makes sense, but then they quite often make an idol out of that and become white supremacists, which again is not helpful. And so there's not much of a Christian nationalist movement in Britain yet. It's in the fledgling levels. Hopefully it will grow, because the only way to return England to England is to return Christ to England.
Certainly. Yeah, that is really interesting. It's definitely been a big, I see that there are a lot of people, I think that from my view online, I would say like the biggest kind of contingent of principled right-wing rhetoric comes from a lot of the guys that you used to work with, a lot of Carl Benjamin's guys over at Lotus Eaters. I think that they do a lot of really good work, but even then, a lot of them who work there are Christian or Catholic of different types. Obviously, Carl himself is not, but I think that they're very, very friendly to that, and they are very happy to engage in, especially Carl, for example, argues a lot for Christian morality. And so I think that there definitely are the seeds being planted there. It feels kind of like maybe more what America was in the mid 2010s, where we were first kind of having to just get past saying like being Christian is okay. It almost feels like, it kind of seems like you guys, or they are back there, but then it's weird because in certain ways, I think the UK is further forward and kind of has progress in some ways over America. I think one of the biggest differences, obviously, is both America and the United Kingdom are suffering from huge immigration problems, and they're of a very different type, I think, though. How do you see that as a problem or as not a problem? I guess, what's your general feelings about that?
Yes, mass migration is one of the biggest problems facing both of our countries. In the UK, obviously, we get lots and lots of Mohammedans coming over, and they hate Christianity and they hate British values or English culture, and it's a domineering ideology that wants to conquer. Essentially, that's what Islam is. It's a legalistic system of taking over. And we're not pushing back against it because we believe in diversity, inclusion, and equality and all that rubbish. But I think it's important for America to see that, because America does see what's happening in Europe and sees the mess that Europe is in. And I think it's important that America wakes up to the threat of Islam, because I don't think most Americans realize how bad Islam is that it's already here. There is, of course, that Sharia city being attempted to be set up in Texas, in the heart of the Free State, for goodness sake. And I'm up here in Michigan, which has more Arabs in it than the rest of the country combined. In Dearborn, there was a terrorist threat thwarted just this week, as you and I are speaking. And there's a mayor of Dearborn that is a Mohammedan, and recently said to a Christian pastor, "There's no place for a person like you in my city. I can't wait for you to leave. I'll celebrate when you leave." Like, that's disgusting. You're a guest in this country, and you're telling the people that there's no place for them in their own city. Outrageous behavior. But even the right of American politics are still courting the Mohammedans. People that are otherwise respectable politicians are courting them for their vote. But that's what the leftists did in the UK, and look at the state of the UK now. So I think if Americans can say, no, this is a Christian country, there's no place for Islam in this country, that will be a very good thing, and it will protect America from falling down the same traps that we fell into in Britain. In terms of the H-1B system as well, that obviously needs addressing. You can't just have massive floods of people coming into the country. And I'm speaking as someone who is, and I'm not an immigrant, but I'm clearly in the country. But you need to be more discerning about who you let in. And obviously there are more libertarian elements that are like, no, this is a melting pot, and just let them all in. And I don't think that's good for anyone.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I'm curious. I think for many people, especially Christians and Americans, it's easy to see the issues with Islam specifically. I'm curious, the UK has a lot more developed of a Hindu, Indian, Bangladeshi, all these different other places from the subcontinent groups. And from the outside looking in, the media, for example, makes it seem like they are just as English as everyone else. You can be English and be Bangladeshi. You can be English and be Pakistani. Is this idea that the media is putting forward? And then you see these news stories and you see kind of the real world, and it's not the fiction being sold to you by the TV producers. And it seems to be a stark contrast.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. This whole diversity is our strength thing is just wording from the devil's mouth. It makes no sense. Diversity literally dilutes us and makes us less of a cohesive, homogenous group. So how could it be a good thing? To be English means something. It means you're of the land of, the blood and soil, right? You have English blood. Your parents or their parents and their parents and their parents were English. And the soil, as in the place, matters. England as a place is important. Britain as an island is important. And they're trying to do away with these things and say that your ethnicity, your culture, your faith, none of those things matter. Of course, they all do matter. My whole thing is that our faith should be paramount, and that's the first thing. But everything else doesn't mean that nothing else matters too. And so English is an ethnicity. Now, British is more of a nationality. And so people can move to England and they can get British citizenship. They'll never be English, but they can become a British citizen. And that's a very different thing. And that distinction, again, is important, because to be English means something to the English. Just as to be Scottish means something to the Scottish and the Welsh and the Irish, etc. It's slightly different, I think, here in America, where people are still deciding, as such a baby of a nation, only 250 years, still deciding what it means to be American. And I think logically it makes sense to say, if you have some connection to the settlers, the first colonies, and that makes you an indigenous American. But if you've moved here more recently and gained citizenship, then you're an American citizen. It doesn't mean you're ethnically American, because Americans are typically Anglos, and there's nothing wrong with that. And this idea that everything has to be a melting pot, everything has to be diverse, inclusive, and equitable is just rubbish.
Mm-hmm. What do you say to the accusations I've seen people putting forward in your direction that that they doubt your patriotism, they doubt your loyalty to the UK because of the fact that you are now living in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, it's a fair accusation to throw at people. I love my country. I would die for my country. There is no war, right? There is no battlefield. And people often say things like, "Why aren't you here fighting?" It's like, well, I literally have a big platform that has been gifted to me by God to use for the fight, and I'm using that platform as best I can. Actually, I'm using it better. Here in America, a country that actually believes in freedom and has freedom enshrined in its laws, I can say things here that I cannot say at home without getting arrested and being sent to prison. Now, if I get sent to prison, I can't. There's nothing I can do. Therefore, but I don't think it's actually about that. I think it's that misery likes company. And if people didn't know that I'd left, they wouldn't see any difference. I'm still producing the same output, but it's a thing in your head that you're like, no, he's left, and that means I'm stuck in here. I'm stuck here in the misery, and he's not. That's not fair. That's what it comes down to. It's our basic juvenile understanding of fairness. I don't think my country is going to be savable in my lifetime. I will do everything I can, but I don't think it is safe. I think God looks at things in big pictures, right? And I think that we have lost our faith as a nation. We've been handed over to our lusts. our desires, and that takes a long time to fix. And of course, the Mohammedans are taking over at the same time. Within our lifetimes, Britain will no longer be predominantly English. England will no longer be predominantly English. Britain will no longer be predominantly British. We're already no longer predominantly Christian. This is a sad thing, but it took Spain 700 to 800 years to reclaim their country, Reconquista. It may take us the same. And I don't want to live in a country that I no longer recognize. I love my country to bits, but it is a memory now. It's not a place. It doesn't exist anymore. The country that I grew up in does not exist. I lived in London for 20 years. London is no longer the place I moved to 20 years ago, and it's a great shame. But it's horrible. It's a cesspit. It's full of knife crime. It's full of illegal immigrants and legal immigrants who hate us, hate the people, hate the place, want to destroy it. And they're being encouraged by the mainstream media, the politicians. Why would anyone want to live in that if they have a choice? I'm very thankful that I've been called for the time to America to serve my ministry here. And nothing is perfect, don't get me wrong, but at least I can continue fighting for my country, but also get on with life and live my life and be happy. And if people resent that of me, so be it. But I would rather be in the land of the free and the home of the brave and be happy than be back in London surrounded by knife wielding, machete wielding Mohammedans who want to kill me.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. I think that's a reasonable complaint. One thing I'm curious about is with how severe these changes are in Britain. I think that especially Americans, we're so much bigger. It's hard for us to understand. A comparatively much smaller amount of people means a lot more to people in the UK, and then also just the numbers that have been coming into the UK are still insane. As this population change happens, I'm curious, do you see, from my perspective, it seems like you're inevitably going to reach a point where, people are just going to stop lying about the fact that there are these tensions, and then the tensions are just going to have to get hashed out at some point. Not that you're encouraging this to happen, but I mean, even a lot of these groups that are being brought in, these groups are not, unified with one another. The Pakistanis, the Indians, Afghans, all these different groups are not necessarily united themselves. So is there anything that can even keep them together? Or do you think it inevitably just turns into like some type of balkanized ethnic conflict inevitably if this trend continues?
It already is. Like, you can look at a map of London, see that's the Gujarati area, that's the Punjabi area. Like, it's already divided by these Asian subcontinental groups. Like, it's no longer East London is the Cockneys, and West London is the poshos. Whatever. It doesn't work that way anymore. We already have the Sikhs and the Hindus fighting the Mohammedans on our streets with machetes. Like, it's already happening. It's just disgusting. We already have, similar things happening over here. You've got black people killing white people on public transport, and no one doing anything about it. It's sick. We're being divided, left, right, and center. And there are a few people that want to stand up and say, no, this is my country, I love it, and this is worth fighting for, and this is what it means to be English. But they are the minority, and they're getting silenced. The vast majority are apathetic, and the vast majority only care when something affects them personally. And by that point, it's already too late. It may already be too late. The demographic change of our country is, the momentum is there. If we don't change a thing, if we don't do a single thing different between now and 2055, the country will already no longer be predominantly white, predominantly British, predominantly Christian, predominantly English speaking. Already, and we don't have to do a single thing. That's already going to happen. Within our lifetimes, the country will no longer be the country that it is. And so something radical has to change to stop that, to prevent that. The momentum is already in place. And so the question is, what radical thing could we do? There's no political answer. All of the mainstream parties are the same, and they will all produce the same results. There's no civil war. People keep saying things like civil war. The English people aren't even armed. We don't have guns. There is no war. What are we going to do? Go out with our kitchen knives and do what? And so the only answer is spiritual. It is returning to Christ. It's getting back to prayer, going back to church. It's believing in something bigger than ourselves, more important than our nation, that can bring our nation back together. Unless we return to Christianity, the nation is doomed.
Yeah, definitely. And I think one of the things that a lot of people might find difficult is that you do see these examples of people who do come and they understand that they're a guest in a new area and they're thankful for, you know, the opportunities they've been given. I saw someone use, and I'm not super familiar with the example overall, so if I say something that might be inaccurate, forgive me, but they had used an example of some of the older Black island immigrants who had come in. I think it was more like in the 60s. And I think that they were using Chris Eubank, the famous boxer, as an example of someone who had really taken up to British culture, so to speak. And so, you know, that people will use this as an example of how the people coming over are actually adopting the British culture. But then it feels like, you know, these really do start to feel like exceptions when you see people like, one of the things I've really noticed is, I think his name's Thomas Skinner. He's the, you know, his just the patriot, and I'm here at the pub, and you know, people like, yeah, Bosch. You see people like him being attacked for just embracing and loving his own culture. How do you think is the way we go about navigating, you know, allowing for the people who were allowed here and are happy and grateful, and then the fact that ultimately, you know, those people are unfortunately in the minority, and you can see that in the fact that obviously just these normal English people are being villainized for celebrating their own culture.
I think you've got to admit that not every group is equal to every other group, and there are tiers to our society. And so natively born English people have preference over people who've only been there 5 minutes, and they have preference over people that have only been there 1 minute. And I mean, that's logical sense. So as an example, my father's parents moved over from Jamaica in 1954, I believe, on something called Windrush, or that kind of program, at least of importing workers. The start of the slippery slope. The gates were opened, the floodgates were opened from the 50s onward, pretty much in Britain, right? But my father's parents integrated. My father was born there. He is now integrated. And now a third generation down to his children, I have half Jamaican heritage, half English heritage. My mother's side of the family are blood and soil English as far back as we can trace, have always been rooted in this land. And so now we have a family that has been fully integrated through marriage and children and generations. And so, you know, I would say I am English, but I also have Jamaican heritage. And so this is the thing. So if we go back to the point of where do we draw a line, I'll say, well, anyone with English blood has some claim to England, and I have English blood, therefore I would say I have a claim to England. It's my home, it's my country, I love it. But people who've just moved over to England that don't have an English blood have less of a claim. And so if someone's, whether they're well integrated or not, if we're looking at where do we draw the line, it's like, well, we have to draw it somewhere. And I would say things like, let's look at demographics, and the Pakistani Muslim community is one in particular. They are 5% of the entire country's demographics, yet they account for 65% of child sexual abuse. Therefore, I'd say, okay, we don't have any more Mohammedans from Pakistan. Our gates are closed to that country entirely. It's a culture that is too toxic. I mean, that's not even a strong enough word. It's just demonic. We can't have it in our country. It's to the detriment of our women and girls. Done. And then we have to have a conversation of, well, do we deport every Pakistani Mohammedan in our country if they weren't born there? Yeah, perhaps. Let's do that. And so we have to draw these lines, make these distinctions on a case-by-case basis, a demographic-by-demographic basis. There's no black and white solution, but it's a conversation that does need to be had.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think, unfortunately, you know, when you get into the reality of it, it has to become, just because of that's how the world works, it will become somewhat arbitrary. And, you know, it has to be, you have to do your best to address it as fairly as possible. But there's, and I think the important thing for us, the people who are trying to save our homes, is to let other people who empathize with us know is it's like, when these hard decisions are being made, it's not our fault that these have to be made. It's the fault of the people who brought them over here and who brought these, you know, people, and it's the fault. Uh-oh. Am I back? Can you hear me?
Yeah, you're lagging a little bit, but I can hear you.
I think we may have. I think I lost him. Let's see. I'm going to try to switch over.
I think I've lost you entirely now, Caleb. Well, it looks from X, it looks like the stream is still live, but you've frozen entirely. So for those people watching, bear with us. I assume these technical difficulties will be resolved shortly. Give us a comment give us a reply in the comments. Let us know how it's going. Well, it looks like it's just me. I'm the only one left in the show. So let's go through the comments. Let's see what we've got. Viper WA says, ask him why he pretends to be in a good standing with the Catholic Church whilst remaining outside of her. It is a good question. I don't know if it's asked in good faith or not. But so I was ordained by a group which are called the Old Catholics, who do maintain apostolic succession and are seeking full unity, but don't have full unity with Rome. So they still have Catholic theology, still have Catholic holy orders, which are valid and recognized still by Rome, but not in union with Rome. The world is messy. The church is no less messy, but I don't pretend to be in good standing with Rome. I do adhere to the teachings of the Catholic Church, and I am a priest, and I do very clear that I'm not presently in communion with Rome. Stardust Revolver says, a new crusade is frozen, but God's will, Calvin continues. I'm trying my best. Oh, he's back. No, he's not.
Just reading comments, good.
OSP69er said, does evangelical mean Zionist, or is that just ones on here? Unfortunately,
thank you, Father Calvin.
Does mean Zionist.
Yes,
quite
thank you so much. Sorry, the Wi-Fi went out.
You're still lagging incredibly, but I can see you now at least.
Okay, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
I can. There's a delay.
Okay.
Is someone else using your?
Well, I think I'm hearing you. I'm on the special network, like the individual network, so it shouldn't be like that. It should be fine. Can you hear me now?
Yeah. It seems to be settling down.
Okay, that's better.
Sorry, I just answered a few comments while you were gone.
Yeah, I told people, and I think you saw it, about the Rome communion stuff. I don't think anyone. One of the reasons I don't have any problem talking to you is because I don't feel like you're hiding anything having to do with that, and so I don't really find that problematic. You and I have disagreements, and I don't.
No, we probably
don't. For the sake of us
understand
talking about politics, I don't really see.
Everyone wants everyone to fit in the same clear box. If you don't fit into that category, it's like, I can't cope. But he's a priest, he's ordained, he's got orders, but he's not in communion with Rome. How does that make? You can't. Doesn't make people need to grow up a little bit and understand that the world is a messy place, and we are all fallen. We live in a fallen world. We're all sinners, and we have to try and bring the church back to one. But it isn't one, unfortunately. There are loads of people baptized in the royal priesthood of all believers who are not in a full communion with Rome, and that's on all of us. And so I take that criticism absolutely, but it's something that is not in bad faith. It's just the state of the world.
Yeah,
hi, Tracy.
Definitely. Yes. Hello. I've been trying to keep the conversation. While we're looking at comments, I'm going to say thank you for the 5 gifted memberships. Obviously, thank you to everyone who supports this. Allows me to be able to take time out of my day to speak with important people like Father Calvin here. So, one thing that I think is interesting to ask you, as someone who is famously known as a British patriot, since moving to the United States, how has your view of America changed? Maybe for better, for worse, just in general. I'm curious what your thoughts are.
That's a good question. I love this country. I think it's fantastic. I think it is the only free country in the world. And I've been doing my research on this. I've tried to find other countries that have a free speech law that does not have a hate speech clause, and there isn't one. Any country in Europe that says we have free speech too is lying to you, because they all say something along the lines of unless something is deemed hate speech. Well, what's hate speech? It's arbitrary, it's abstract, it's depending on who takes offense. That's not free speech. And if you don't have free speech, you don't have a free country, because you can be oppressed by whichever minority group claims to be the biggest victim of the day. And in each country, that's a different minority group, unfortunately. And the people here are good. People here are entrepreneurial. They build stuff. The people here are fighters. I mentioned earlier, most American citizens are one of the biggest armies in the world. That's a wonderful thing. I own my own guns now. I have protection. If anyone wants to come and take advantage or hurt me, if the government wants to take my rights away, I have protection as a person. I am sovereign. That's a foreign idea. In Britain, Englishmen aren't sovereign. Parliament is sovereign. The people are not sovereign, and it's a modern idea, but it's one I like. And I said earlier we could learn a lot from Americans. We really could. Unfortunately, I think the English attitude is to look down on Americans, and it's because when America came to be, we were the greatest nation in the world. We were the greatest empire since the Roman Empire. We no longer are. And so we can no longer afford to have that snobby elitist attitude, but it's kind of part of our culture, unfortunately, at the moment. We need to shift away from that because there's so much we need to learn from America.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, thank you for the compliments, obviously. Yeah, it's really interesting. Thing I've found, as an American, I live in the Southwest, so we really have, I think, some of the newest culture, and especially, there is definitely an old world sense to even the East Coast that definitely doesn't exist, here where I'm from. And so because of that, it's even been hard for me. A lot of times people talk about what does it mean to be an American, and they say, well, it means this, this, and this. And for me, I'm like, well, I live here on the other side of the country, and I can't even identify with those traits that you've put forward. And so it's something I talk a lot with my different guests about. And so it's something I found interesting, especially here. I'm partially of Hispanic heritage, and I don't identify, I don't have any personal cultural connection to that at all. And so it creates this weird dichotomy, I guess. And then obviously there is a influx of Hispanic cultural influence, especially recently, to a somewhat unhealthy, degree. So it's been really interesting. Have you made your way out to the Southwest at all? California, Arizona, Texas?
I have indeed. I wouldn't call that the Southwest. I call that the South. But not so much California, but definitely Texas. I spent a lot of time in Texas. I've been to Arizona quite a few times for Turning Point events. I spent a lot of time in California. California is probably the most beautiful part of the country with the worst people. So I don't go back there very often these days, but I used to. Yeah, it's a shame. The liberals destroy everything they touch, don't they? They don't see it, and then they move somewhere else to destroy that too. They need stopping. This country will be a much better place if you repealed the 19th Amendment. White liberal women are the downfall of modern society. Yeah, are you frozen again?
Yeah, you're not going to hear disagreement from me on that. Although, okay, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yeah, just keep going. Plow through it.
Okay. Yeah, so, yeah, it is unfortunate. I think especially, I agree definitely with the landscape in California. I think it has probably some of the highest variety and density in the deserts and the mountains and the beaches. And it's really unfortunate what's happened. And I think that, you can point, probably the biggest person at fault is probably Ronald Reagan, but, it's a lot deeper than him in general. And it is really unfortunate. Obviously, what is it called? Was that?
I said you've got a fan there. That comment.
I saw that.
Yeah. if you don't mind me asking, yeah, that question is fantastic.
Yeah. Sorry, let me put it up. Let's see here. Sorry, I got some lag. One more time.
Why do some say being a Christian conflicts with being British first or nation first? How do you get around that? My answer to that is England was founded in 927 AD as a Christian nation, and it has been Christian for over 1,000 years. Our common law legal system was built upon the Ten Commandments. Literally, the character of our country is centered around Christ. The moment we removed that over the last, 50, 70 years or so, it's fallen apart. So something that survived 1,000 years has fallen apart very quickly once you remove the center of it. And so it's very easy to demonstrate that it's a Christian country founded on Christian principles, centered around Christ himself. And that's what's important. That's what makes England, England. And people will argue, well, we had pagans here first, or this or that. And yes, there were pagans on the British Isles first. Absolutely. but this is before Christ. Since Christ, those isles have been predominantly Christian and remain so. It's unfortunate that we've ditched that in the last 5 minutes, but if we want to return to greatness, that is the only way we can do it. Returning to prayer, returning to church, returning to Christian values, getting married young, having children, teaching them the faith. It's as simple as that. So anyone that thinks it's a conflict doesn't understand what it means to be English.
Mm-hmm. I think it's especially important for many people to realize that patriotism and the love of your home is a Christian virtue. And so, to not prioritize in the same way that it would be bad to not prioritize your own family. The nation is your extended family. You also need to prioritize your nation as an extension of your family. And that's why it becomes problematic to import all these people, is that it's all of a sudden it is no longer actually your family. These are no longer your third and your fourth extended cousins, so to speak. And it is hard to immediately look upon your fellow citizens and understand that they really are your family.
Yeah, that's so true. And it often goes back to ordo amoris, that we should, order our loving relationships. And of course, our first duty is to protect our children and our wives or husbands, and then the parish, and then the wider community, and then the nation, and then foreign affairs. But that's important to remember, because the liberals will continuously tell you, no, the Ukraine is more important than home. Israel is more important than home. Both those things are a lie. The home is more important. And then we extend our hand to help others. It's the airline approach of put your own face mask on before you help the person next to you put their mask on. It's a very simple, common sense approach that we've understood for millennia, until, again, the Enlightenment kind of confuses us and gets us waylaid and put on a secular liberal track that leads to nowhere.
Yeah, definitely. I think that's a real shame. I do think that it's not something that a lot of people are taught, so they are not automatically thinking it. Although I think for someone who really is a well-meaning Christian, I don't think that's really the hardest case to make for many of them, which I think is beneficial. I think there are harder things, convincing someone that, democracy is better that monarchy is better than democracy is a harder case to make than it is to argue, to convince a Christian that he should put his country before others.
That's very easy. Like the scriptural references we have to kingdoms, or kingdoms, right? To nations and tribes, ever since the Book of Kings, have been centered on kingdoms. And in fact, the heavenly kingdom is also a kingdom. So this idea of monarchy, of hierarchy, is biblical. There is no reference to democracies in the scriptures, and it's assumed that whilst heaven is a kingdom, hell is a democracy, because it's the tyranny of the majority. And there's no rule that says the majority always right. In fact, the majority quite often wrong, and the majority can oppress the minority. There's nothing inherently good about democracy. People assume it is because we're told it is so often. And again, this is a modern error, or a modern heresy even. We don't have to make an idol out of democracy. But we do have to appreciate the importance of kingdoms, especially the King of Kings. And people say, I have no king but Christ. Well, what is he a king of then? He's the King of Kings. And the reason that's important is because when you have a king who understands that his power comes from God, and his authority comes from God, as we hear when Christ talks to Pontius Pilate, there is no authority given to anyone that doesn't come from him, that actually they are accountable to God. And that's important too. We don't have that in many of our modern politicians, who believe that their power comes from the people because they're elected by the people. It was the other way around in the old style, in that the power of the king came from God. And he understood. We see this in the ceremonies in England still, when Her Majesty, the Queen Elizabeth II, died, her orb and scepter, those worldly symbols of power, were placed back on the altar, because the authority that had been loaned her from God was returned to God. And of course, those are then granted for a while to the next person in line for the throne. And they swear an allegiance not just to the country, but to the God that we all in the country adhere to. And it's the thing that should unite us all. And it's why having a national faith is important. And it's why this universalism or pluralism of all ideas and all faiths being equal actually undermines our cohesiveness.
Mm-hmm. And so how do you go about navigating that one of the things I really respected, there's a lot of critiques people can make about Queen Elizabeth, but I had seen someone play a portion of her coronation speech, and it seemed to me that she really, really understood that her life was in service to God. And, she and I might have viewed what the responsibilities were or what she should have done differently, but I think that she really, really understood that. And I think that she really understood that, she was there for her people and there for God. And I think that it seems to me that's something that King Charles maybe isn't quite so sure about. How do you go about navigating that when the monarch in charge, no longer seems to understand the proper order?
Then it doesn't work. When people don't understand the proper order, everything falls apart, and we have literally chaos. The opposite of proper order. Therefore, we need to either remove that king or replace him. Those are the only solutions, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that seems reasonable. I just wanted to ask you. I didn't want to. I figured that's what you would say. I was just curious. All right. So one other thing I had wanted to talk to you about, lost my train of thought. You're talking about the king. I'm trying to think of what else. I definitely had other things. Well, one small thing I want to say that I really appreciated to hear from you. You did a talk, I want to say right when you had moved to Lotus Eaters, you did a video talking with Carl Benjamin, and you called him out for wearing sneakers on, or I guess trainers as you guys would say, on during the filming. And I have to say that was something I really appreciated. I think you had said a gentleman should wear leather shoes, and I want to say you specifically said it that way. And since I heard you say it that way, I've been repeating it at other people. So I just want to put it out there that I appreciate that sentiment. I try to push people to dress often. And it's something I think that is very, very important, especially for men and men who want to be taken seriously and want to make a change. So I guess as a slight transition, I just want to put that forward.
I think it's fundamentally important because I really respect Carl Benjamin. I think he's a very good man. I hope he comes to the Christian faith because it will really push him to the next level of where he needs to be as a leader in our country. But I can give him that jovial nudge as a friend. And I think that's what we as men used to do. We used to give each other encouragement in a jovial way and correct each other, privately and publicly in ways that are helpful to each other and to our society. And somehow we've dropped that, which is why I honestly think we've got into the mess of the whole trans situation. We've got men dressing as women and other men are just like saying nothing. We should be saying, get home, go home, take that stupid dress off, put your trousers back on and then come back. Just be men again. But on the sense of fashion or sartorial elegance, a man should look like a man, not a boy. And a man should look like a man who takes himself and people around him seriously, not someone who's off to the gym. Like if I'm going to the gym, I'll wear my running shoes, I'll wear my tracksuit bottoms, and I'll wear a t-shirt. If I'm not going to the gym, I won't wear those things. And no man should ever be seen in public with a t-shirt on. I know it sounds controversial, but I put it out there. We should always have a collar of some sort because we're taking not just ourselves seriously, but everyone else around us. We're treating each other with respect and dignity. And actually, it's nicer. It's nicer to have higher standards. Whenever people look at photographs from 100 years ago, they go, oh, didn't everyone used to dress so well? It's like, there's nothing stopping us all dressing so well now other than us being lazy slobs who don't care about ourselves and the people around us anymore. People going to supermarkets in their pajamas and slippers or wearing Crocs or Ugg boots or whatever. It's like there's no need to be so sloven. It's a sin, actually. It really is a sin. Like you owe it to yourself and you owe it to the people around you to do better, to have higher standard, to be better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I definitely agree. I think that you do a really good job with right now with that one, making that case. It's really good. Some point in college, I had gotten rid of all my t-shirts, and I had said that when I was going out, the goal was that I was always going to be wearing, an up or a collared shirt, and it wasn't specifically, it was more just because I personally like clothes. So for me, it was more of a challenge as far as like to push myself in that way. And I think that, I do think you see a lot of more lazy guys, they will admit, when they go and they put on a suit for a wedding, you can tell there's something about them changes. When they go and they have to dress up for something, you can tell. And everyone appreciates being in those environments where people are dressed well and taking themselves seriously. And, you almost feel like you need to maybe say please and thank you a little bit more, when you're
people need permission these days. people feel like they need permission. So we as men have to give each other permission. We have to help. We have to encourage each other. But women need to do it for themselves too. And women need to make sure that they are dressed modestly and their friends are dressed modestly. They don't need to get the boobs and the bums out in order to be more attractive to me. In fact, it's less attractive to most men when women are dressed like a slut. Like, dress like a woman, dress like a lady, not a whore. I mean, it's strong language, but it's biblical language, and it's important because it's about raising the standards of your daughters, your nieces, your wives, your girlfriends. It's good.
Yeah, definitely. I definitely agree. Yeah, I think that's really, it's in the same way that like terrible architecture, it kind of suppresses your soul. I think that terrible clothing does the same way. I think that beauty really kind of nourishes your soul, and I think that that's the same for clothes. I think it's the same for architecture. I think it's the same for going to a beautiful church with the beautiful liturgy. I think all of it really kind of elevates you as a person.
Yes.
So one kind of specific question that I don't know a ton about, and I'm curious to kind of get your feeling on it. So when it comes to the Anglican or the English expression of liturgy, I've in the Catholic Church, they have the Anglican Ordinariate, and they've gone forward in trying to offer that to a lot of people who have a specific, a feeling an allegiance to the English expression of liturgy. I'm curious if you know anything about that, how you feel about it. In what way is the unique English kind of expression of liturgy unique, and what is kind of the beauty there? What is there to preserve?
That's a good question. I love that liturgy. If you watch any of my mass streams, you'll notice 9 times out of 10 we're using the Divine Worship Missal. It is the Ordinary at Use liturgy. It's beautiful. I think it's the most beautiful English liturgy. Because it's preserved ancient tradition. And so all it is the traditional Latin Mass translated into English, but with actually, nice reverential English, not that modern rubbish that the Novus Ordo uses. It's more of a early modern English, and also keeping snippets of what were in the Sarum use. And so the reason it's important for us Englishmen is because, well, the whole church has always had local customs. There are like 24 or 25 rites in the Latin, in the Western Church, right? And people think there's just the extraordinary form and the ordinary form. Like that's not it. That's one use. There are 24 or 25 uses. And so everyone's had their own traditions. Every culture has had a tradition or an expression of the Catholic faith. In England, we had a few. We had one up in York, and we had one up in Salisbury. The most famous one is called the Sarum Use, and it was beautiful. And this is before they were all, it was around the time of the Reformation that everything got kind of standardized into the TLM, as we call it now. But prior to that, the Mass was always in Latin, but it was always, there were different expressions of it, okay, according to local custom. And so in England, we kept a lot of that. And then because of the Reformation, much of it was put into the Book of Common Prayer. And that's managed to hold on to it because whilst the European continent mostly remained in communion with Rome and therefore went through the liturgical reforms of the 1960s, which just threw the baby out with the bathwater, and I think that they were probably more Protestant than the Protestant Reformation. So whilst on the continent, the Mass was diminished, and I'm not saying it's not still the Mass is the Mass, but the Novus Ordo is far less reverent, generally speaking, and ditched a lot of important liturgy and elements of the liturgy, whereas the traditional Latin Mass doesn't. And so that's been suppressed, and people are looking around at their different flavors. The Ordinariate, because they weren't a liturgical group, managed to hold on to much of those treasures. And so that missal is for me, that's what the ordinary form should be, rather than the / kind of post 1960s thing that most people have to adhere to. It holds on to what has always been known to be true, what's always been known to be beautiful, what's always been known to be good. And that's the job of the church. That's the job of sacred tradition, to hold on to truth rather than just to innovate and be novel. We shouldn't be innovating. We shouldn't be novel. Those are anti-Catholic sentiments. But that's the missal side. But on a practical side, in England, in high church churches, we held on to things that much of the continent did away with. So rood screens are a good example. Altar rails are another one. Not having girls as altar servers, not having Nanny Sue as extraordinary Eucharistic ministers. Lots of these reforms that came in on the continent didn't happen in the same way in high church churches in England. And so that expression is very traditional. Some of it is within communion with Rome. There's an ordinariate church in the middle of London that is a very beautiful church, but most of it is outside of communion with Rome at the moment because of the situation with the Reformation in England and Henry VIII wanting his annulment and all that stuff. But that wasn't down to the people, and so the people held on to their tradition as best they could. And I'm hoping that helps, actually. That England has a lot to give to the church.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I'm a recent convert, but I'm canonically Eastern, actually. So I'm Ruthenian. So basically just Byzantine. And it's been interesting because when I was converting, I knew that I didn't like the Novus Ordo, like from an aesthetic perspective. You kind of have to lie to yourself or have bad taste, I think, to really love the way the average Novus Ordo is presented. And so because of that, I actually have a lot of options by me, but I just ended up Eastern. And so it's been interesting. I have a lot of sentiment for the ethnic minorities who, really care about their ethnic expression, and so I think it's really interesting because America is so Anglo, we almost don't even view the English as a separate, ethnic group that would have their own expressions, because a lot of what is English is just what is American from a cultural perspective. So I think it's really interesting to kind of go and see the way the English have kind of preserved their heritage in that way.
Yeah, and people are welcome to come to my church at St. Paul's, Grand Rapids, and see it in person. They'll see a very reverential mass that looks identical to the Latin mass, the traditional Latin mass, but in the vernacular. And again, there's no reason that that's not what the vernacular mass could have been, rather than it wasn't just a translation, it was a stripping apart. And people with bad intentions used the translation process to have their way with the liturgy where they should never have been allowed.
Yeah, it's really unfortunate. And there's so much, there literally are dozens of novels and books written on the subversion that happened. And even, you don't even have to necessarily believe that there was explicit subversion just to understand the reality that the product that came out in 1969 is just not as impressive, not as reverent, not as respectful as what had existed before. I don't think you have to you don't even need to buy into a conspiracy theory to acknowledge the differences that exist. I think that this has been really good. I'm going to check to see if there's any more comments real quick. I think I might have one last thing to say before we go. Thank you for your time. I've really had a great time speaking with you.
That's been a pleasure. I'm liking how engaged your audience is.
Thank you. Yeah, they're doing pretty well. And honestly, because it's the middle of the day, actually, normally we would probably be getting a little bit more going on, but it's the bit of a weird time for them. Okay, so one of the last things I wanted to talk to you about, you are, a online content creator, a professional online content creator to some extent. You also do a lot more than that. You're not just that, but that is a lot of what you are. And there has been a lot of news going on recently, two particularly big events. I covered them last week, but I'm curious to get your feeling on them. One of them is Nick Fuentes speaking with Tucker Carlson, and you had some broadly positive things to kind of comment, but you didn't really get into depth, I don't think. And then, so I'm curious to get your thoughts on that. And then also about Matt Fradd moving over to the Daily Wire, which is something that's worried a lot of Catholics. I'm curious what your feelings are on those circumstances. I'd like to talk with you about those for a little bit.
Sure. So starting with Tucker and Fuentes, Tucker Carlson is a nice guy. I like him. I've been on his show a few times. I've met him in person, get on with him really well. I fully support him in doing what he does. He is a professional journalist, gets people on for conversations. He has open dialogues. People forget that when he invited Nick onto his show, he wasn't friends with Nick. So this wasn't a way of platforming Nick, as people were saying. This was him being a good Christian and burying the hatchet as two people in a similar sphere who've had beef. I'm like, well done to you. Fair play. Very good. They both showed forgiveness and they both had a very open and good faith conversation. That's modeling best practice for Christians. Wonderful. And so people who are like, oh, Tucker Carlson's platforming Nick Fuentes. Firstly, Nick Fuentes has his own massive platform. He doesn't need platforming. And secondly, that's not what Tucker Carlson was doing anyway. So I fully back Tucker in that 100%. Nick, and I agree with Nick Fuentes on a lot of things. A few things I disagree with him on, but so what? That's how it used to be. You don't need to agree with anyone on everything. In fact, you probably shouldn't agree with anyone on everything except for the church and the faith, right? I think he agreed to come on my show at some point on one of his live streams. I haven't managed to arrange that yet because we're not in contact. But I'd love to have a proper conversation with Nick Fuentes at some point because he is a Catholic. He does have a faith. There's clearly some room for growth there. But what I liked about their conversation was the fact that it seemed paternal and it seemed like Tucker was helping Nick. And I know, I don't mean that in a patronizing way, because I can see that Nick has been hurt. He's been spurned. He's been, so many times by people who he should have been able to trust. And that's kind of formed him, right? He came up through this as a young lad. He came up through the movement being stabbed in the front and in the back constantly. And so, of course, he's hardened in some ways to the movement. And in some ways, he's developed his own movement, which is doing fantastically well. And the Groypers are a strong army that will always have his back. But you can't do these things alone. And one thing that President Trump has shown is that collaboration works. And he's great at coalition building. And I think that's what Tucker was trying to show Nick, in that you can forgive and let bygones be bygones, and you can reform allegiances. And some people can be allies again, even if they've hurt you in the past. Like, we have to be stronger and be more forgiving. And I honestly think Nick gets that. One of the first things he did afterwards was say, if we've been enemies in the past, doesn't mean we have to be enemies now. And I think it was MTG he was saying he would be happy to work with, but I saw growth there, and that's important. He's still young, and he's done really, really well. He's fantastic at what he does, but to see growth is inspiring. And so, yeah, they both have my support. Good stuff. Matt Fradd is a friend of mine. I've done his show a couple of times, spent some time in Steubenville. Love Matt. I was hoping to see Matt Walsh and Michael Knowles leave the Daily Wire, and I think a lot of people probably feeling similar, that they're getting to a point. Well, maybe not Michael, but it seems like Matt was getting to a point. He doesn't look happy there. Let's just put it that way, and it's understandable. I think a Catholic outlet would be a great idea. That's something I'm going to be milling around with, because I don't think you can be friends with anyone. You should be friends with all kinds of different people, and you should be evangelizing at all times, not just in what you say, but how you live. But I don't think it's a good thing for Catholics to be working under the direction of a different faith or people of a different faith. I think that's very tricky, especially if your whole job is, it's not a job, it's a vocation. It's a Catholic ministry. It's that's Pints with Aquinas is an apologetics podcast, and so to be under Jewish leadership, I think that's going to be problematic. I don't want to badmouth the podcast or Matt, but I think he's going to struggle, and he's in my prayers. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, I'm really glad to hear that. I think that you have the advantage of being, knowing a lot of the people and being close to it. And so I had spoken with some other people who are kind of in that world who had different feelings than I did. And, ultimately I think that especially involving Matt, whatever issues could possibly arise, it's not that I think that they're going to come, but from the potential problems that could be created by other people there. Because it really seems to me that, and I had said this when I did my review, when that news had come out, is I had said, I think that the greatest moments Matt's had are actually when he's tackled some of the most difficult conversations, when he spoke with Dennis Prager about pornography, when he spoke out against the evil of bombing Japan, of nuking Japan. And I think these were really, really good examples of some of the, in 50 years, someone's going to be talking about Matt Fradd. I think that they're going to talk about those things. And so I really, no matter what happens, I hope he's able to maintain the courage to continue to say those types of things.
Yes, and I think you're right. And I think if people can be supportive critics, that's the best thing we can do, and be helpful rather than just cancel and shut down and I'm not having anything to do with that person now, or even worse, attacking that person. That's not helpful. And I've seen that for all of the names we've just mentioned. They've all been under attack by their own side, and that's not good. We have to form stronger bonds with people on our side because the enemy is always attacking us. So we don't want to do the enemy's job for them.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Okay, so I think that's everything that I wanted to really push. Oh, wait, I have one question that someone wants me to ask you really quick. Let me see here 1 second. Okay, so this is a good one, actually. For our last question, this is a good question to end on. So my friend here wants me to ask you, what are your thoughts on the growing Christian nationalism movement amongst Protestants, and how do you view the collaboration of Catholics with the Christian nationalist Protestant movement? Obviously, you've spoken. I believe you're friendly with a lot of the guys from the Right Response, Joel Webbu, and a lot of them. So I'm curious what your feelings are on that. I'm glad he gave me that question. I think that's a good question.
I am. I've got a lot of time for Joel Webbin. I've got a lot of respect for him. Some of the people on that side don't like me because of my Catholic theology, and they see that as a threat, unfortunately. I am of the opinion that we should be allies in this, and some people call it co-belligerence, but whatever. We want to live in a Christian nation because we know Christianity is the truth. We know Jesus Christ is the truth, and therefore we want our elected representatives to govern with a Christian moral compass rather than some abstract or secular or demonic compass. And so we should all be pushing for that. Which flavor of Christianity becomes a question later. But I'd say we are probably more integralist, and the Protestants are more, I don't know. But I mean, I have no problem with a theocracy. I think it would be a very good thing for the reasons I've outlined earlier about monarchies. But I think most Protestants in America would not be, because they are more Republican in their theology as well as in their politics, which I find problematic. But each to their own. It's a fight to be had later.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I met a Protestant at a dinner, and it was my Catholic friend had invited me, and he was friends with the Catholic friend who had invited me, and it was really funny. That Protestant gentleman and his dad were both there, and both of them are Protestant, and he and I were both talking about how important it is that the state be explicitly Christian. And we were talking about where we disagree, and it was funny because his dad was more, like you were saying, more Republican, more kind of Americanist in the theological sense, in his feelings. And it was really funny. He said, "Man, you guys are crazy. You both want to go after each other." And we both went, like, I mean, maybe if we win, but it's like, that's a question for a long time from now. And we were both it was a really productive conversation. And I think both of us liked being able to talk with someone who was a little bit different. But still were able to agree on so much of that,
Absolutely. And we have to remember that we have far more in common than different. And the enemy is always trying to divide us. And, we've got Mohammedans wanting to come in and take over. We've got, Pakistani Mohammedans wanting to rape our daughters. We've got so many threats. We've got Israel wanting to manipulate our theology in order to make us back every kind of genocidal act they perform. We've got so many enemies, all orchestrated by the enemy. We are all centered on Christ. And yes, we have differences because, again, we live in a fallen world, which is messy, and we're all sinners. But we should focus on him and see him in each other. We've got to find the Christ in each other, and then we can fight as Christian soldiers alongside each other. Lord of the Rings style.
Yeah, there you go. I think that's a great way to end the stream. Would you like to leave anyone with the best places for them to watch and support you before we shut the stream down?
CalvinRobinson.com is my Substack. That's the best place to subscribe to me. But I'm on most of the social media platforms as just at Calvin Robinson. That's on X and Instagram and Facebook. What was I going to say? I'm on Truth. I'm on Getter. And I'm on Threads. I'm on all of them. Just if you want to add me, it's just at Calvin Robinson. My YouTube is at Common Sense Crusade. But thank you for that.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for watching, everyone. I think this was a very productive conversation. I hope that I was able to bring out something unique in this. I didn't want it to be the same old. I think that I was able to get a lot of my questions answered. So I was very excited. Thank you for speaking with me, Father Calvin, and I'm going to end the stream with right there.
It was a pleasure. God bless you.